In our third and final installment of Cape Town in the Crossfire, American-style tactics to curb violent crime on the city's mean streets. How a hospital in Ethiopia is helping victims of female genital mutilation. And the reconstruction of an ancient inhabitant of Britain reveals some unexpected traits. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. We begin tonight with some good news from Kenya. The last of 3 television stations shut down by the Kenyan government last week resumed transmission on Thursday. The channel Citizen TV confirmed on its Twitter feed. Authorities shut 3 private stations 9 days ago after they planned to live stream the symbolic presidential inauguration of opposition leader Raila Odinga. The court ordered them to be allowed to resume transmissions a week ago, and 2 of the stations resumed broadcasting on Monday. The reason for the delay for Citizen was not immediately clear, but the station tweeted Citizen TV is now back on air. Also on Thursday, protesters marched on the streets of Nairobi to demand more diversity in President Uhuru Kenyatta's cabinet picks as required by the Constitution. Well, today we continue our special series on gang violence in Cape Town, South Africa. Yesterday, we brought you the stories of victims and survivors. Today, we're looking at efforts to curb violence you may not have heard about. Africa 54's Heidi Adams-Fitzpatrick has more. Heidi?
Thank you very much, Vincent. Gun violence in South Africa claims up to 21 lives a day. The homicide capital is Cape Town. That's my hometown. Its gang-infested suburbs, called the Cape Flats, are among the most dangerous places in the world. And so I went there to see how authorities are using American-inspired technology and a human touch to confront the violence. A gang bust on the Cape Flats. Police knock down doors, looking for drugs, weapons, and dealers.
And I find it on you.
But they can't seem to knock out the criminal gangs that have turned these Cape Town neighborhoods into killing fields. There are about 130 gangs in and around Cape Town. The largest and most notorious, the Americans, a powerful force in the criminal underworld of drug and gun smuggling, contract killing, human trafficking and prostitution. Thousands of members on the streets displaying the American flag and brand logos, each one ready to kill or be killed in the rivalry over turf.
They're gonna die, you guys like a tomato. I'm killer for sure, I'm gonna kill them. No jokes.
When asked about the innocent bystanders caught in the crossfire,
Never you were here there. The Americans shot a small child off, we shot the innocent people, we shot the real people if we shoot them.
Whether that claim is accurate or not, the crossfire leaves plenty of collateral damage, triggered by a deadly mix of high unemployment, a steady flow of drugs, and an abundant supply of stolen firearms. That's why Cape Town authorities have turned to ShotSpotter, a real-time gunshot detection system developed in the United States. Audio sensors pick up the sound of gunfire on the streets. GPS technology pinpoints where the shots were fired. The information is sent to a 24-hour monitoring center in California, where it's analyzed and fed directly to local police. ShotSpotter was originally brought to South Africa to tackle rhino poaching, the first time it was used in Africa. Cape Town officials say it's not a magic bullet, but they're already seeing less gunfire in gang hotspots like Hanover Park.
The figures show a decline in the frequency of shooting because there is a suppressive element, a disincentive to shoot.
Is this a war?
If you look at the number of shots exchanged in 1 square kilometre of Hanover Park during the 9-month trial period of the ShotSpotter technology, we recorded 2,800 shooting incidents. So by anybody's standards, that must be called a war.
Technology is a useful tool, but Cape Flats community leaders say boots on the ground are just as essential. Pastor Craven Engel is the founder of Ceasefire, a gang intervention program started in 2013. It's a special kind of ministry, deploying ex-gang members on the streets as violence interrupters.
Our job is to get to the shooter, to quarantine him, to alter his behavior, not to shoot. That's our job. You know the game plan now?
Violence interrupters strategize before hitting the streets. Instead of earning a living committing crime, they're now earning a living to help stop it. Glenn Hans says the Ceasefire project is about getting and giving second chances.
I was part of a gang. I changed my life not for Ceasefire, but I changed my life because I needed to change my life. And yes, this is just the benefits of changing my life, is to work in my community and give back to my community.
Engel and his team use ShotSpotter to home in on gang shootouts.
They will be able to put on their listening device and they will know this is definitely shots been fired.
A map is sent to the violence interrupters' phones.
And immediately if they look at this particular map where the shot's been fired, then they will know the altercation is still between this gang and that gang here. All this red dots is multiple gunfire. So then they will zoom in on that particular shot that's been fired and go exactly there. Then they interrupt the violence and get the gangs to maybe talk to each other.
This type of mediation involves interacting with gangs and others to gather information. The optics have led some residents to wonder whether the violence interrupters are truly reformed. Engel says he conducts rigorous vetting of his team because the job requires they play a dual role.
He needs to still have that street level credibility because they come out of prison, they understand the gang language. He cannot go talk to the gangs about sugar and tea. He's got to talk to them about the issue at hand. And on the other hand, he needs to act like a normal father and a normal community member. And I'm expecting this double life of them. Once they've signed up for this job, it's my duty to believe that they have changed.
Well, Haiti joins me now to talk a little bit more about gang violence in Cape Town. What a fascinating coverage of gang violence in Cape Town. But what we see playing out there pretty much resembles what you would see on the streets of Baltimore, somewhere in Chicago.
Correct, Vincent. That's because many of the conditions on the Cape Flats resemble those of many American cities. This idea of a deliberate campaign to pack poor people of color into these densely populated housing projects. And so that urban geography of apartheid still remains in South Africa today. If you're poor in South Africa, that country is still very segregated for you. And so you see a lot of the people on the Cape Flats have also the sense of dispossession and displacement because the problems have their roots, just like in America, have their roots in slavery. The people on the Cape Flats are descendants of Southeast Asian, of East African slaves. They're also the descendants of the native Bushmen and the Dutch settlers. And so there's been this, identity crisis over generations, and people also feel this sense of displacement, this sense of dispossession. And so when you see the Americans gang, they believe that wearing American branded clothing, wearing the American flag, it gives them a sense of power. Yeah. It gives them a sense of street prestige, even if it's these little toeholds of prestige on the streets. And so this matters to people in what is otherwise a very bleak landscape of life on the Cape Flats.
And in your series, you really feature a lot of the violence and guns, and everybody seems to be having a gun. The question is, where do these guns come from?
Well, I think, first of all, it's important to understand that what we're seeing and what we saw in this piece really is the street-level operation of a much wider international criminal network. These gangs are often have very, very strong links with the Nigerian mafia, for instance, on the continent. They have links to the Chinese triads, the Sicilian mafia. And I've been a reporter covering this for many years in Cape Town. Any reporter there will tell you, our reporting shows that these gangs, in the hierarchy of these gangs, it goes up very high. And the guns you see in the hands of these gang members used to be in the hands of police. Late last year, the police minister, Fikile Mbalula, he admitted that the guns that these gangs have were sold to gang lords by police officers, what he calls weak police officers. 2,000 guns disappeared last year. Only a third were recovered.
And perhaps that's why, like one person in yesterday's segment said, We need the army on the streets of Cape Town. Now, the army on the streets of Cape Town, how do people respond to that?
Well, you know, people say the government has admitted this is a war. The community members will tell you this is a war. Everybody seems to be in agreement that this is a war. So community members say, bring out the army if this is a war. And there have been these short bursts of military intervention, really just as a scare tactic, to scare these gangsters and just to mainly keep the peace. But they're not solving the long-term problem. Their job is not to police these areas. And the government has been very hesitant to bring out the army. It's one of the hallmarks of South Africa's democracy. You do not have the military on the streets. They should be in the barracks. So there are these arguments and counter-arguments for whether the army should be there. A lot of people saying this is still Africa and you do not want the optics, those images of the military out on the streets. They should be in the barracks.
They belong in the barracks. I have to say this has been a very courageous assignment that you've accomplished and also very insightful. Thank you very much, Haiti, for doing this. Well, Africa 54's Haiti Adams Fitzpatrick. You know, we want to go back to New York now. I don't know if we have our guest there, David Monda, political analyst and professor at City University of New York, was joining us live from New York to give us some perspective on the situation in Kenya. David, okay, thank you very much. I was concerned a little bit there. Now, you know, let's go back a bit and talk about the fact that you came back from Kenya, and we've seen so many things happening. There have been accusations of people breaking the law, going against the Constitution. Who is keeping the law? Who is breaking the law in Kenya between the government and the opposition?
Ironically, it appears that the government of Kenya is breaking the law. We had a situation where the opposition candidate, Raila Odinga, instituted what he called a swearing in of himself as the people's president. And ironically, there's nowhere in the Constitution that forbids him from engaging in such an act. However, the government decided to overreact and to declare that this was a treasonous pronouncement, and what eventually ended after that was a summary arrest of opposition figures, including a lawyer called TJ Kajwang, and a deportation of one of the activists who'd sworn Raila Odinga in as a people's president, which was Miguna.
Yeah. Now we saw
at Uhuru Park.
Yeah. One of the first reactions we also saw is the shutting down of the media houses. Of course, the last one of them, Citizen TV, is back on air. But having been there and experienced that, I mean, what does that tell us really about where the country could be going?
I think it tells us that the country could be going towards a very dangerous area, specifically the fact that the rule of law is not being followed. We should not forget that numerous court orders were placed to force the government to reopen these media stations, NTV, KTN, Citizen, and Inoro TV, the four main stations which constitute 70% of the viewership in the country. At numerous times, these court orders were ignored by the very government that claims it stands for the rule of law. Let's also not forget that the activists who were arrested by the police were not brought in court, and their due process rights were violated. They were held for long periods of time, up to 4 to 6 days, and the law states the habeas corpus rights of the accused need to be protected. In other words, they needed to be arraigned in court within 24 hours. So we see a cycle of impunity and violation of the Constitution and rule of law, which is very damaging to democracy in Kenya.
Yes, we've been seeing protests on the streets, including today, where some are protesting against the lack of appointment of more women and those of physical disability. Question is, do you see the government being forced into a position where it might have to kind of pull back and have to sit on the table and negotiate?
That's a difficult question to answer, Vincent, because on one hand, the rule of law is there. It's specific in the Constitution in terms of issues of gender equity, representation of women in our parliament. As it stands right now, that is not in place in terms of women's representation as per the Constitution. And we've seen a cycle of impunity and disregard for the rule of law over the past couple of months or so. So going forward, it really begs the question whether the government will respond and uphold the rule of law. They do have experts in cabinet who understand the law, yet the actions of the government tend to speak otherwise. They tend to speak towards a violation of the rule of law.
Well, it's a conversation that will definitely continue. Professor Monda, thank you very much for joining us today, giving us your perspectives.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, thank you. That is Professor Monda, who's a political analyst and professor at City University of New York. Now, I want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince McCory. Now, coming up, how a remote hospital in Ethiopia is helping women recover from the damage of female genital mutilation. Or is that Somalia?
How do you see the world?
I see countries in turmoil.
I see our planet changing.
I see people at peace.
No matter how you see the world, you'll get an unbiased and uncensored view of it on Voice of America. On television, radio, online, and mobile. In more than 40 languages all day, every day. Millions of people tune us in.
How do I see the world? On Voice of America.
What joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Mudu, who will tell us more about this hospital in Somalia. Lino.
That's right. We continue to look at female genital cutting today. And as we reported Wednesday's authority in the self-declared Republic of Somaliland have issued a religious pronouncement of fatwa banning the practice of FGM and vowed to punish violators. Joining us via phone from Somaliland for more is a woman who has been championing the fight against FGM in Somaliland, Edna Adan Ismaili, founder and director of the Edna Adan Hospital. Ms. Adan has held several positions in the past, including World Health Organization Regional Nursing Advisor and former Foreign Minister of Somaliland Republic. Edna Adnan, welcome to the program. Hello, Miss Edna. I think I'm having a little technical problem hearing her. Let's see, do we have her? Miss Edna, are you there? Okay, we're having a little problem connecting with Edna Adan in Somaliland. So now we are going to go to Ethiopia, where around 3/4 of women are living with the painful and sometimes life-threatening results of female genital mutilation. As we hear from VOA's Deborah Block, one hospital in a remote desert region of Ethiopia is working to help some of them.
In this village in the Afar region of Ethiopia, the traditional but atrocious practice of female genital mutilation is common. This woman does not want to be shown on camera, but 25-year-old Khadija does want people to know she was only 7 days old when she was forced to endure genital mutilation.
Because I was cut when I was 7 days old, I was unable to hold my urine for long, and when I must go, I have to endure an excruciating burning sensation. Later, when my menstruation began, the pain worsened even more, and after I got married, it was painful to have sexual intercourse with my husband.
She was married at 14, and a year later went through the difficult birth of her first child. After having 2 more children, she experienced renal complications that almost resulted in her death. Her situation, unfortunately, is not unusual. According to an Ethiopian health survey in 2016, 3/4 of Ethiopian females have had genital circumcision.
And in the Afar region, 9 out of 10 females have been subjected to the practice, most before they were even a year old. A doctor at a hospital in Afar says it is hard to change the attitudes of families toward female circumcision because it is the cultural norm. But he says he can make it easier for women to deliver their babies.
We perform a de-infibulation procedure in which we make an incision in their vagina to recover the appropriate opening that the mutilation removed.
Other women come to the hospital to find a way to relieve the painful results of their circumcision.
Most of them are also very stressed emotionally. After receiving our pain-free de-infibulation services, they go back home feeling happy. Most of them vow to never let another woman go through female genital mutilation.
This woman, now a midwife, used to perform circumcisions.
When I used to cut girls' genitals using this blade, I always made sure it's very sharp, like this. Otherwise, the girls could go through severe physical pain.
She used to believe that her work safeguarded a woman's virginity and marital faithfulness.
That was my justification for doing it. But after attending trainings, especially by religious leaders and government, I now understand this practice is wrong and it can destroy a child's future.
Ethiopia's government is tackling the issue through public health services. But Khadija is determined to stop the practice now.
Whenever I find a parent that still insists on practicing female genital mutilation, I try to convince them otherwise. Their small girls shouldn't go through what I went through and live a similar gruesome life like mine.
The United Nations reports at least 200 million women worldwide have undergone some form of female genital mutilation. 44 million of them are 14 years old or younger. Deborah Block, VOA News.
And we are back with Edna Adan Ismaili. She is founder and director of the Edna Adan Hospital. Miss Adan, are you there?
Yes, I am here.
Thank you so much for joining us. And let me have your reaction to this religious fatwa that was recently ordered by the religious body to stop FGM.
Well, it's something that we have been fighting for, campaigning for, and lobbying for over 42 years. When I started the fight 42 years ago, I was under the impression that with sensitization and counseling and education, we would end the practice sooner. But it took us 42 years to get to this fatwa.
Wow.
It is a good step. It's a step in the right direction. It shows the support of the government and it shows the support of the religious leaders. But it is not the end of the battle because FGM, female genital mutilation, has no place. It has no place in health. It has no place in our religion, and it must end.
Now there are
but we're grateful that it has been pronounced.
Some activists that are of Muslim faith say that it is not a religious practice. So how significant will this move have in ending the practice in the country? Can you tell us?
Well, many people who practice it do it because they only believe that Islam requires it. Islam requires boys to be circumcised, but it is not an obligation that Islam requires of girls. So this will clarify the situation for them. It is not the end of the battle. FGM must be abolished totally everywhere, in every country in the world.
Okay, Ms. Edna, thank you so much for joining us. We have to leave it there. And then that was Edna Adan Ismaili. She's founder and director of the Edna Adan Hospital. And that's our health report for today. So stay in touch for more. Find me on Twitter @LenorMoudou. Back to you, Vincent.
Well, and thank you very much for joining us today, Lenore. Now be sure to watch for Lenore Moudou every Tuesday and Thursday for the latest health news in Africa right here on Africa 54. And it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54. DNA evidence turns up surprises about ancient residents of Britain. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Africa 54, and here is what is trending. Now, from high-tech to old school, in an industry upended by the changing play habits of tech survey kids, German toy makers are pinning their hopes for growth on traditional real-world toys with a little help from the big screen. The teaser for the first ever Playmobil movie may seem unremarkable. Rival Lego has been doing a lot for a company that has hardly tweaked its recipe for success since 1974. It marks a sea change, evidence of the upheaval sweeping the sector of toy makers compete not just with each other, but also for the attention of children glued to tablets and smartphones. Other German brands are marketing their soft and snuggly toys because, after all, you cannot actually cuddle an iPad. And finally, Cheddarman. You want to meet the Cheddarman, the reconstructed face of a 10,000-year-old skeleton. The oldest complete skeleton found in Britain was discovered in a cave in Cheddar Gorge in 1903. Scientists drilled into his skull to extract DNA from bone powder. They say analysis indicates he had blue eyes, dark curly hair, and dark to black skin pigmentation. Researchers say he belonged to a population of people that moved into Europe and eventually Britain from probably the Near East. He shares a genetic profile with Western hunter-gatherers that migrated to Europe from the Middle East after the last ice age about 12,000 years ago. Evidence suggests that Europeans' pale skin tones developed much later than originally thought. And that's what's trending today. Now, working long hours as an IT... Okay, and that's all sure. Getting ahead of myself. Thank you. Have a good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. Woodwork is any part of a house or building that is made of wood.
Crawl out of the woodwork.
This expression sounds troubling.
I won! I have the winning lottery ticket.
Oh, that's great. How much money did you win?
I won $25,000. But please, don't tell anyone.
You're right.